We got a quorum. We got a quorum. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Ladies and gentlemen, if I could get your attention, please. We'd like to call to order the November 3rd, 2017 meeting of the South Coast Air Quality Management District Governing Board. And we'd like Ms. Judy Mitchell to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'd like to welcome everybody this morning and ask if any of my colleagues have any opening comments. Mayor Cacchiotti?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I have a couple of slides first I'd like to show you. Our city is going to be purchasing some new parking enforcement vehicles, and hold it right here for a second. This is our police department. We've got parking enforcement vehicles, but they're Jeeps and they pollute and they use a lot of gas, probably 10 miles per gallon, and just polluting the city. So we're looking at these small little parking enforcement vehicles. They're all electric. You see our captain in there on the left. He's about 250 pounds. The other gentleman there, one of my consultants. Go to the next picture. And this is a side view of so there's a couple different models out there. City of Santa Monica's purchased about 30 or 40. We're looking at purchasing 2 or 3, and it'll replace 2 gas guzzling vehicles, but they're all electric, have a range of about 80 to 90 miles, and they have I took one out, has a top speed of 40 miles an hour in Huntington Drive. So cities, counties, public works departments, parks departments, these are great to use and are used all over the United States. They're just starting to come out. Okay, next. This is a car. This is a little story I want to tell you. 15 years ago, I got rid of my Audi A4 German car. I said, I got to do something about the environment, Mr. Chair. This was the first version edition of the Toyota Prius, 2002. Had it for next one. I want you to see the odometer, 150,000 miles. But I kept this car as an experiment because a lot of girlfriends I was dating did not like this car. So I lost a lot of girlfriends.
That's what they told you.
I should have known. But here's what's good about this besides the girlfriend factor. What's good is I've used that car 150. You know how many times I've touched the brakes or rotors on this car? I've spent zero. Where all my other cars, whether it's a Chevy, a Ford, that Audi, I was spending 25 and driving in LA traffic in the 4-county region here. I have not spent a penny on brakes. And when I last took it there 2 months ago to the Toyota dealer in Pasadena, he said, you still got probably 10, 15, 20,000 miles. I said, have I broken a record? He said, there was the proverbial little old lady from Pasadena had 190,000 miles and still original brakes. So this shows you the technology of hybrid. So can you imagine electric cars? You'll probably never change the brakes.
Let me ask you a question, though. Isn't that the car that you had the batteries changed in?
Yes, I had so it's the battery, the hybrid battery. You've got a regular car battery, and hybrid batteries in the back, under the back seat.
Right.
It was guaranteed for 100,000 miles. I got 137,000 miles on it. And then I went to Toyota wanted 4,000 for the battery. I said, nope, I'll go to a local dealer down in Orange County, so I supported Orange County. Went down there, city of Westminster, local business, and they were just there was lines of Toyota Priuses there lined up, and within an hour, they remove your back seat. It's about this big, looks like a bunch of discs. They put it in. He guaranteed it for 2 years, lasted 2 years and 1 month. Just so I could I wanted to get 150,000 miles, so 6 months ago, I changed the battery again at Toyota. They dropped the price to about $2,900. For this vehicle, the newer vehicles, it's only $2,200 because it's easier to access the battery.
Right.
So that's a new technology. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one more on a separate topic. I don't know if you saw in the paper yesterday, Edison rolled out their big plan for electrification and things like that. I wish Dennis had been here because he's been fighting this for before I even got on board 8 or 9 years ago.
Right.
But I've got a couple emails from our reps in the San Gabriel Valley, Joshua Torres and others from Edison, saying, how can we partner with you? So I know we've had a kind of Judith and myself a meeting with General Motors and Edison over the last couple of years, but maybe something more formal. If we can partner with Edison, they finally, after we've been pushing them for, I hate to say it, Mr. Chair, you've been here longer than me, and I, when they come to the city and say they're doing this, I say, you don't understand, we've been pushing Edison for 8 years I've been here, and you're long before. So how would you, I'd like to do something where we push Edison. If they're pushing for electrification like we've pushed them for years, how can we partner with them to really make this happen?
I think it would be pretty easy to do that. But you have to remember, Sean's not here yet. I'm gonna wait till Sean gets here so he can beat you about the head and neck and say, why are we pushing electrification as compared to hydrogen and the other things?
Okay.
But in memory of Dennis Yates, I'm prepared to go with you and sit down with these people as well as Wayne and see what we could do jointly to promote the electrification and the increase in charging stations and all the other things that need to be done to support the electric vehicle. I don't know what the new tax law, how that's going to impact it, because I understand the $7,500 tax incentive is going to go away. But I think that it's obviously part of the future, if not the whole future.
And maybe I know in my city and Judith and other elected officials here, it's very you may say, well, just put a charging station in, but we've been trying to put one in South Pass. To get to a parking lot, you've got to go under the road, you got a saw cut, and it's not 5,000, it's like more 50, 60, 70,000. And maybe schools, churches, businesses, to help them, we've got to provide incentives, and we are doing something, but maybe more to make it happen. So just thoughts, Mr. Chair, thanks.
No question, we should be doing that. Dr. Parker?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Approximately 3 weeks ago, I was, along with our executive director and Ms. Mitchell and the chairman, took a trip, small trip, only lasted about 5 days, to Berlin, Germany, and to Amsterdam and to Rotterdam, to see one of the demonstration projects that we have here that we have been participating in, that it was completed by Siemens. It was demonstrating heavy-duty electrical trucks. And one of the amazing things, I was asked to give an interview to the person who actually developed the pantograph that actually goes up and down. These are trucks that can be going 60 miles an hour and then want to off of electrical charges that will be basically connected to the grid, and they can let the pantograph down and pass the truck, and when they are outside of the electrification, it then goes to other forms of electrical charging for the engines, and then get back into the grid and then have the pantograph itself to go up. And that's really a kind of a new innovation. I think we have participated in a 1 mile demonstration from our ports now down Alameda Highway. It's really was a very interesting and fascinating development that we saw, and it really proves that the technology that is there has been developed into a state now that it can be basically expanded out, and we have basically participated in that. And we went to Rotterdam and to the ports and to see exactly how they were doing their electrification itself, their ports, and met with the people who were actually designing this. And I thought that it was very enlightening and very, very informative for us to actually see that some of the things that we have been the forerunner in and participated in, and I think we had participated to the tune of approximately, what, 1.3 million, I'm sorry, $13.5 million. Is that correct, Mr. Nastri?
For the catenary, yes, sir.
Yes, for the catenary system. So I think that sometimes when we participate in these kind of programs, what we are really always concerned about, are we seeing the results itself of our dollars that we've invested? Is it basically bringing about the kind of materiality? I was reading just the other day that we took off 15,000 trucks, diesel trucks out of our community. That would be the equivalent of taking 1.5 million cars off the road in Knox. Think about that. That's 100 times. One truck is equal to 100 cars. So I think it's a situation itself that we can all feel very proud to the extent, especially us here at the board and for the people here in the community, that we are participating in the kind of leading edge technology that is going to bring about great results to help us meet our goals and objectives of reducing NOx in our community. So I just wanted to let everybody know that I thought this was a very informative trip. Certainly shows that the technology that we have basically invested in is very important and certainly will yield great results for us. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As part of that trip, Mr. Nastri and Dr. Miyasato and I went on to Gothenburg, Sweden, to visit the Volvo truck manufacturing facility there. And we visited their laboratory where they're doing some testing of their engines. And that's an interesting company because they build heavy-duty trucks, marine vessels, smaller vessels, not the big ocean-going ships, and off-road trucks as well, and construction equipment. And so because they manufacture all of those kinds of vehicles, they have a platform in which they can exchange parts and materials and ideas across the three sectors, and there aren't many companies that do that. So that was interesting. And we also, in Gothenburg, had an experience on their electric bus, which is totally quiet, and those are the green buses, and those buses are full when you see them on the street. The other buses, they're not so full because people wait for the green bus to come. And then the electric bus, they demonstrated how it pulls into a shelter because, of course, it gets cold and snowy and rainy up there. It pulls into a shelter to charge. And inside the shelter, a pantograph descends from the roof to the top of the bus to charge it, and it can be charged in about 10 minutes. So right next to the shelter are coffee shops and things to do, little shops. So if you had to wait, you would be comfortable while you waited. So that was an interesting experiment. And one thing we talked about when we visited Gothenburg was how their agencies are closely connected. The transportation agency, the air quality agency, the municipal agencies that administer these things are closely connected so that it's easier in a way to get things done. So we talked about how here we operate more in silos, and maybe we ought to work on consolidating our efforts a little bit more. So, and also the trip to see the catenary in East Germany was really a good experience. We did we have a catenary project here on Alameda, but it's in a very urban area. This one in Germany is on the airfield, and the trucks can get up to a pretty good speed. I think they were going about 60 miles an hour or so on that road. It's an old landing strip, and we could actually watch one truck on the catenary come off of the catenary, pass another truck on the catenary, and then get back on. And it was a seamless operation. And we got the experience of riding in the trucks when this happened. And even from inside the trucks, it's a seamless operation. You come off the catenary and the truck just goes on like you don't feel any difference in the source of power. And then it can get back on, and again, you don't feel any difference in the source of power for operating the truck. So, and then we had some very good discussions with the representatives in Germany about what they are doing. And they are doing 2 demonstration projects in Germany with the catenary. One is a 10-mile long strip, and another is a 4-mile long strip. They're in different areas. And there's different functions on each of those experimental pathways. So I had a busy month. It seemed like I wasn't home much. So I also went to the CAPCOA conference in Monterey. That the CAPCOA is the 35 air districts. The executive officers of the 35 air districts meet annually in Monterey. And so the executive officer from Sacramento and Phil Cerna, the ARB representative of that district, he's on the ARB board, and I, as being the representative from the South Coast on the ARB board, were on a panel at that conference. And the primary subject of discussion was AB 617 that passed last year. And it requires the air districts to be working closely with the Air Resources Board on regulating more regulation of toxics and more community-based kinds of regulation. So we had a very nice meeting with the other air districts about how that can get done. Many of these districts are small rural districts with limited funding, and they're very concerned about how it will get done. Much of the money in the initial outlay for 617 comes to the larger air districts because we're urban areas that have pretty severe problems with toxics. And so we wanted to assure the rural air districts that they would also be covered with money from the outlays on this, and that our resources would be available to them because we have laboratories and testing methods that they don't have because they're limited. So it was a good effort to show our willingness to cooperate with them. The other important event that happened this month was the Air Resources Board had a groundbreaking ceremony in Riverside on the new laboratory that they are building in Riverside. And it's about a $400 million building, a state project. Will employ over 300 people. Will be state-of-the-art testing for certification of engines. And we actually were interested in that because we do a lot of work with CCERT, a technology facility already in Riverside. And so this laboratory will be affiliated, connected, and they could work together on some of the projects that we all are interested in. $153 million from the VW settlement monies will be contributed to the new Air Resources Board laboratory. And we think that is well justified because it was that laboratory in El Monte that discovered the VW scandal. And so we think that this is a good use for those funds. So that was a very important event. We expect this to be a good stimulus for the Riverside area and for Riverside County. And many dignitaries were there, including our executive officer, Mr. Nastri, and Dr. Phil Fine, and many legislators also came and participated. So it was a very nice event. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Burke. I just wanted to make a few housekeeping announcements. We have a lot of students here with us today. If anybody has cell phones, I would just ask that they silence their cell phones. The restrooms are located to the rear and to the left of the building, and that in the event of an emergency, please evacuate toward the rear and out to the left. If we're having an earthquake and we have to shelter in place, please drop cover and wait until you hear further instructions as to what we do next. That's all, Dr. Burke.
This past week, Dr. Parker and I attended the Taste of Soul, which is sponsored by.
Same picture you took last year.
Yeah, no, that's the fresh picture. Those are all new people, 350,000 of them. It's hard to imagine. Every year I keep thinking it's either going to diminish or there's something's going to happen, but it just keeps rolling along. And it is, we ran out of material, I understand, and Mr. Alatore's people were busy talking to people for hours and hours and hours on end. And I just think that there's probably a way, which I haven't thought of, to even further maximize the exposure to this number of people. It's just absolutely incredible. And I just want to once again invite my colleagues to come down next year if we do in fact sponsor it again and see it, because it defies description.
Mr. Chair, what street is that we're looking at?
That's Crenshaw. That's Crenshaw. When you're on the stage, and I took that picture from the stage, there are people to the horizon. You cannot see the end of the people. And they're wall to wall. I mean, it's not like one guy standing here, another guy standing like 3 feet away. People are right on top of one another. And it's probably the 10th year that this thing's going on. And they've never had one police incident. Not one. Not one.
How's the music? How's the food?
Oh, the food is too good. I told somebody that it's my second favorite day, second to Christmas, because I get to eat everything my wife won't let me eat any other time of year when I go down there, and she can't stop me. But the food is just beyond delicious, beyond delicious. So, okay, well, we better get to the consent calendar here. I'll take the consent calendar items 1 through 21. We have testimony on 2A and testimony on 30. Do I have any other items that need to be pulled by any board member or any board member that cannot participate in this vote?
Dr. Burke?
Supervisor Ashley.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I am disqualifying myself from agenda item 2A because of a
2A.
financial interest in Chevron USA.
Okay. Supervisor Rutherford.
Mr. Chair, I'm going to be abstaining from item 7. I just didn't have a chance to run all the conflicts necessary on that one.
Okay, item 7. Okay.
Is item-
Dr. Liu?
I think I'll defer to our executive officer, who is probably going to take on one of the issues I wanted to mention.
Thank you, Dr. Liu. Dr. Burke, staff would like to pull item number 8, and we will address that in the upcoming board meeting.
Thank you.
So 8 will be off the agenda.
And-
Continued.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to add, I'm also recusing myself from agenda item 7 because of a campaign contribution from Waste Management, CC&R, and Scott Brothers Dairy in excess of $250 within the past 12 months. Thank you.
Okay. So I also need to recuse myself from an item involving a contract with MTA because of the contribution they made to my employer, Coalition for Clean Air. So I'm recusing myself from agenda item number 5 because the Los Angeles Metropolitan Transit Authority is a potential source of income, which is materially affected by this item. Also going to recuse myself from agenda item 9 because of a financial interest in Google, probably Alphabet, which is materially affected by this item.
All right.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to pull items number 5 and 9 just for a couple questions.
5, and 9.
9.
Okay?
Mr. Chair, I'll move the remainder of the consent calendar.
Wait, we need Supervisor Cool.
Oops, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On Agenda 5, I don't have a financial interest, but I'm required to identify for the record, I'm a board member of LA County Metropolitan Transit Authority. And on item 9, I will recuse myself because of a, I might say, small financial interest in Google, which is materially affected by this item.
Councilmember Robinson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to pull item 4 just for a brief comment.
Sure. Mr. Nastri, you had some comments that you'd like to make?
No, sir.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, well, I will accept a motion on all items except 2A, 7, 5, 4, 2A, 4, 5, 7, and 9.
So moved.
Second.
Would the clerk call the roll?
Doing a vote.
Well,
Item
is there
7,
any
I didn't hear
opposition
that anyone pulled item
to
7.
any of those items? There's no opposition, so the roll,
7 wasn't pulled, actually.
yes, 7 spoke. Okay, then we will go to item 2A. We have testimony on Bridget McCann, I think it is.
I'm Bridget McCann, Manager, Southern California Region for WISPA. So WISPA's been actively engaged throughout the entire PR 1180 rulemaking process. To date, WISPA's participated in all 6 working groups. We've had meetings with AQMD staff. We've given verbal comments to Stationary Source Committee, as well as a public workshop, and we've submitted 5 different comment letters, one of which you should have been provided with to the entire board. Well, progress has been made on this proposed rule and draft guidelines since October 24th working group, which has been basically 7 working days. Staff has released 3 different versions of the draft rule and 2 versions of the draft guidelines. There remains a great amount of technical clarification to be resolved in the language of the guidelines, and WISPA has plans to meet with staff to discuss these issues. We respectfully request that the governing board direct the removal of community air monitoring fees from PR 1180 and move that fee requirement under a separate Regulation 3 rulemaking. WISPA and its members understand the need, consistent with the recently enacted AB 1647, for the district to recover costs associated with refinery-related community monitoring. Consistent with past precedent, Regulation 3 fees is the proper venue for fee rules, including these. The cost basis for the proposed fees in 1180 were only released to stakeholders last week, so they've not been able to fully consider the cost proposal, and staff has not demonstrated they are limited to refinery-related costs as required under AB 1647. So these structural and procedural problems would easily be remedied with the removal of community air monitoring fees from PR 1180 and addressing them in a Regulation 3 rulemaking. We also understand that the typical schedule for Regulation 3 is in May, which may not be soon enough to support the district's implementation of the requirement for community monitoring under AB 1647. For that reason, WISPA recommends that a focused Regulation 3 rule for the specific need be considered at the board's February 2018 meeting. Thank you.
That was the letter you sent us, right? Mm-hmm. That's what I thought. Do you have a comment on that, Mr. Nastri?
Yes, Dr. Berg. Staff is doing set hearing on this issue. And as we have in the past where we still have an issue to bring before the board, we still have time to work this issue out. There are a number of factors that are involved in how this is being approached, and I'm going to ask Dr. Fine to address some of the concerns regarding the actual deployment, how it's been done in other areas, and how we intend to work through it before the board meeting next month.
So this rule deals with the implementation of Assembly Bill 1647 that was signed this year. And there's 2 components of 1647. One is fence line monitoring at refineries, for which the facilities will be conducting that. And the other component is community monitoring around the facilities, which the bill says that the air districts will be conducting. So we have, this rule deals primarily with the fence line monitoring, and we've been working very closely with all the stakeholders and are very close to pretty good agreement on that. But what we wanted to do is get started on the community air monitoring side that the district is going to be conducting. And because time is short, we're supposed to have these systems up in a short, by the beginning of 2020, and we need to start procuring equipment, RFPs. There was a need to get going and establish the funds that the refineries are going to be paying to reimburse the district for the cost of conducting the community monitoring. So we thought, staff believed that there was a pathway within this rule to at least set up some of those fees, or at least a schedule for the fees to get the process going. We did release last week the 30-day, before the 30-day package, we had already had a working group on this topic. We have come up with estimates of the total cost of doing this monitoring around all the refineries in the basin. And the real disagreement is not so much about the total cost, but how that cost is assigned to the different facilities and how they will reimburse us and perhaps the schedule. So we're still working through that. There's still time to make adjustments before the hearing and that we're proposing for December. There's a meeting this afternoon. There's meetings scheduled next week. I was on the phone with 4 or 5 different stakeholders yesterday. And I think there is a pathway forward to get to December. If not, then we can always consider in December deferring the fee part of the rule and coming back, as Bridget mentioned, at a later time.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Pleasure of the board.
I'll move the item.
We have a motion and a second. Would the clerk open the board?
Mr. Chair.
Oh, I'm sorry, Dwight.
What I'm most concerned about is the precedent setting that's being mentioned here. And so it sounds like from the comments, and I didn't feel like it was properly addressed, how this is potentially going outside of how we'd normally handle things. So it sounds like the comment that was made was that under Regulation 3 fees, that's how this should be addressed. And I was wondering if you can just elaborate on that a little bit more, because that's more my concern rather than, I feel like, can it be worked out in the next 30 days? There's definitely the potential there. And if not, like you said, you're willing to allow the fee portion to be extended out. I think the rule needs to be adopted as quickly as possible, and I think we all feel that way, but I'm most concerned about precedent setting and then how that might affect other things down the road. So if you could address that, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. So Reg 3 generally refers to ongoing fees, permitting fees. These fees are one-time fees that we're talking about to set up the system. And so that's why staff had felt that it was appropriate to continue to try to work forward on this. I don't know if Dr. Fine or Mr. O'Kelly would like to add to that.
Well, I could just say we've already committed to bringing the operation and maintenance fees for this program into Reg 3, such that they could be, adjusted for CPI like all our other ongoing fees. These are just the initial costs for the setup and installation, and there are many examples of other rules we have that do have fees within them, especially if they're fees that are somewhat temporary, whether it's 1 year or a couple years. There's mitigation fees. We have other rules that are like that, so it's not breaking with precedent, but we do see the value of the ongoing annual fees to be in Reg 3.
All right, thank you very much for the response. I appreciate that. I'll just let my colleagues know. I think for today, I'm good with the motion, but if we can't figure out how to deal with this, then in December, I'll definitely want to separate out the fees, no question about it. I know that there was some comments that maybe it has to do with the how the allocation to the different refineries would be spread out, but being that it's the association that's commenting, it seems like my first assumption is that the association as a whole feels like that's not settled yet. It's not just 1 or 2 particular facilities. That's just how I'll feel in December for sure if we can't get this resolved between now and then. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other comments by any of my other colleagues? See nothing on the board. And we have a motion and a second. Would the clerk call the roll? The item passes 9-0. The next item will be item 4. Who pulled 4?
I pulled 4, Mr. Chair. I mentioned this in the Technology Committee, and I just wanted to bring it up during our full board discussion, but we had a brief discussion about scrapping trucks. First of all, I think this is a fantastic plan. As I mentioned, and it was a compliment to our executive officer that I didn't know that he was a futurist. So he was working on this way back during his time as administrator at Region 9, and this is kind of coming full circle here, getting to a point where there's a great collaboration between Puget Sound Air District and South Coast, and so I'm very excited to see that. In light of the Clean Air Action Plan that was adopted by both ports yesterday, and the number of potential trucks that could be scrapped as a part of that, I think continuing to look at this process of how trucks are scrapped and whether or not they can be potentially used in other areas of either the United States or even some of our neighbors, especially Mexico, I think is definitely worth some investment of time in looking into scrapping a truck that definitely shouldn't be in the South Coast District, but might be a significant improvement in a region that's very close to us, I think is something to look into. So I just wanted to make sure that I passed that comment along to all my colleagues, if you didn't happen to have caught it in the technology report. And with that, I'll move the item.
Second.
We have Dr. Liu, would you like to comment on this
Yeah,
item?
just quickly about this. I too think this is a great idea and congratulate Wayne and the California Air Resources Board for working on this too, and our staff. The one issue I have is that it's 2012 trucks and newer that we're passing off to a facility that could use those trucks because they will be cleaner than the ones they're using. However, I think at the ports, our priority needs to be the 2007 to 2009 trucks. There are more than 5,000 of those, I believe, still operating at the ports that we really need to get out. They're the oldest and dirtiest ones at the ports. So as I proposed yesterday at the Clean Air Action Plan hearing, I think that we need to come up with rate structures, incentive structures, and other things to motivate the drivers to get out of those trucks sooner rather than later. And I know that staff is going to support me and work with me on that, but I just wanted the rest of the board to hear that too.
I don't. Yes, I think we should probably vote on it. We have a motion and
second.
a second. So would the clerk would open the roll? That item passes 10-0 also. Yes.
This is 5, right?
Okay. Moving on to item 5.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I pulled this. It was what Dr. Parker and Judith had discussed on their trip to Europe. And I'd read this, and I've always been excited that we've supported this project of catenary systems from the ports, cleaning up the neighborhoods. Monsignor's neighborhood, too, to help him. So I'd like to show some pictures, because his class heard it. And this is a catenary system. Maybe Matt can talk about this while we're doing this, because Matt's the one really, our staff really pushing this new technology. Matt?
Yeah, thank you, Councilman. So this is just a picture of 2 of the 3 different truck architectures that we have running on the catenary system. This is actually a test track that's adjacent to Alameda Street, but the first blue truck is the Volvo truck. That's a plug-in hybrid diesel that can operate on the catenary and for a short period, short range 10 miles off of the catenary system. Yeah, so the catenary is actually the overhead lines. That's much like you'd see in a trolley car or a trolley train up in San Francisco or other areas where they use that. It's also what they use for light rail systems, so the trains that you see in the middle of the freeway system here. The pantograph is the double white levers that are on top of the cab of the vehicle, and when that connects to the overhead catenary lines, it electrifies the vehicle, and then it can run on electric motors and zero emissions at that time. So that's the same architecture that was seen in Germany that Dr. Parker and Board Member Mitchell both described, and they also rode in the trucks that were there in Germany. The one behind, the white truck behind the blue one, is battery electric. So even when it comes off of the catenary system, it can run all electric and with zero emissions, with the intent of also charging while it's on the catenary line. If you can go to the next slide, Robert, and hit play. This is actually a video of the truck running down Alameda Street. You see it is not on the catenary. This one is on the catenary. You see and so the idea there is it can show an as-built environment. They can actually do the same type of technology that's being run in green fields in Germany and Sweden. If you run the next video. This is just a shot that shows the vehicle coming off of the catenary system. And then showing that it's running both on and off. In terms of its placement, in this case, but then it can recharge the batteries along long stretches of the catenary where perhaps it's not an environmental justice area. So you can stage these and have them charge where they will not be affecting the communities.
Matt, can you tell our audience where this demonstration project is currently going on and the duration of the demonstration project?
So the demonstration project is currently being conducted in the city of Carson. It's on the Alameda Street, the cross street, and I believe the nearest cross street is Sepulveda. So it's a 1 mile long demonstration. We like to say it's 2 miles because you can go a mile up and a mile back down. But the difference here, as opposed to the ones that are being run in Germany and in Sweden, again, it's part of an as-built environment. They put very large catenary bases that are above ground. They couldn't drill down in the ground 40 feet. And so it's showing the viability of the technology not only in greenfields in Europe, but in very heavily urbanized, industrialized environments here in the United States.
I'll move the item, Mr. Chair.
I'll second.
Speaking to the item, I know I'll never get invited back on one of these trips. I sealed my own fate while I was there, both in Amsterdam and in Germany. So, I'm 100% on the record. And Matt knows that I'm kind of a bottom line guy. So when I was 7 years old, which was 71 years ago, they had a trolley car run down this middle of the street in Cleveland that hooked up to the electric wire overhead. What's the difference? What's the technological leap forward in the catenary system to that trolley car that I used to put the pennies on the track and mash them out? It was really cool.
Yes, Dr. Burke, as you saw, the pantograph could connect and disconnect. So the major difference is
You mean in 71 years we got the ability to disconnect from the electric?
Well, that's correct.
I'm just, and I know I gave those guys a hard enough time in Germany, but, okay, here's another one. We rode trains everywhere in Europe. What's the difference between the train travel on that electric that the train's running on and the truck travel?
So, Dr. Burke, I think the main attractiveness of the technology is they're using very similar components that they do on light rail. So the technology transfer should be a modest challenge because they're using very same technologies, same supply chain, et cetera. But as you're accurately pointing out, the difference is you can connect and disconnect, and you can use it on roads as opposed to right-of-ways on the rail line. So the innovation is you can actually build it and operate on highways where it can interact with other vehicles as opposed to a dedicated lane that's only for rail.
I see. Okay, well, you can understand my concern and my hesitancy about spending enormous amounts of research dollars in something that doesn't really give me the comfort level. I mean, my colleagues are the ones who vote on this, but I'm sure as electeds, most of them are going to evaluate cost versus reward. And I know that Mike, God bless his soul, not here anymore, used to really have but his was more of the aesthetics than of the practical. And as I was challenging those people over there, I'm not quite sure on where our investment sets compared to their investment. And since we have such a significant part of the investment, total investment, we get none of the rewards of the technology that we're helping develop. But we're putting up the money. So, you know, I know we could use this, and I know that the ports are in dire need of electrification or some kind of modification to take them. Oh, I see. Oh, Joe, you can't stand here for this? Oh, he's over there shaking his head no. But I know the ports are in dire need of lessening of the pollution levels, and they want to go to zero, and we're asking them to be satisfied with near zero in the near term. But this is awfully expensive to do that. And I know that we're out front on this one. But I just want to keep everybody in mind that there's not a blank check that goes along with this.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
if you might, likewise, that I'm kind of in the middle. I was born and raised in Birmingham, Alabama, but I also lived in Cleveland, Ohio as well.
Right. About the same time I did.
One of the things that I noticed that is significantly different, that the pantographs themselves were two cables, or one cable, that had to be led up with ropes from behind the buses. And if every now and then when someone would turn a corner, they would jump off the tracks. Someone would have to get out with a pole or the conductor or whatever and put them
Grab
back
that rope
on.
and put it back on the wire.
Now what we have is a system that not only will basically have a kind of a linear wide pantograph that will have the positive and the negative connection, but it will also recharge the batteries at the same time that it's running. As the battery systems become more developed and can get up, as you can in your Tesla, 200 miles off of one charge, we could really have a system that we would only have to have a catenary for a certain distance, then not have it there for mountains and other kind of terrains that it would make it very difficult to deal with, and still have zero emissions, because then we could be running off of batteries. That's a significant change in the development, because the engines now can basically run off of each one of those kind of electrical charges. The old system sometimes used to have the electricity itself that would basically have one connection and then go down into the rails and come up and re-electrify. We don't have to have that anymore. So there's some significant changes that are being developed, and the problem itself obviously is that government has to help to develop those. I agree with you. The unfortunate part about it, we can't participate in the technology advancement for these patents that are being, this gentleman that interviewed me, he said he had over 53 patents on pantographs that he has developed in basically with Siemens. Mm-hmm. And they're the ones who are getting all of the revenue as they basically develop this throughout the whole area itself in England and Paris and other countries, because 90% of their infrastructure for commercial use is electrification. They don't have heavy-duty buses and cars and trucks. They have trains that run 250, 300 miles, an hour, et cetera, to transport people. We don't have that kind of luxury in our country. I guess the governor is saying that sooner or later we will have the the bullet train coming from San Francisco, not all the way down to Los Angeles. And I kind of asked him one day, well, what happens? We've got 40% of the people right here in our 4 counties. Why isn't it coming here? Why is it stopping in mid-California? But the fact of the matter, we're moving in that direction. And I know it's a very costly kind of thing, but I think it's one that if government doesn't do it, who's going to do it? But we still have the problems with the pollutants in our air. So anyway, I thought I would, I understand and I share your concerns and I agree with them 100%. And I think that we should probably start producing some bills to say that as we have to come up with this new technology, we can benefit in some kind of way for monies that would be contributed back to help us develop more technology to basically make things a lot more easier and to lessen the pollutants that we would have to be contending with.
Ms. Kuhl?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think in the larger sense, it's interesting. I grew up in LA and we had a whole network of streetcars, not just the
Right.
red car, but streetcars, everywhere, electrification. And essentially what I think was underestimated at the time was the kind of planning that goes on in various other industries to gain an advantage, because it was the industries most closely associated with automobiles who bought up our transportation system in LA and essentially said, we're not going to do that anymore. Sold it as wonderful freedom, you can go anywhere you want, et cetera. And within less than a decade, you couldn't see your hand in front of your face in LA because of the pollution. The solution to which so far has been to try to clean up the fuel, and then only recently going back to the kind of public transit that might make it possible to further clean up the air and, and help people who can't afford $25 to park downtown every 3 hours to have a way to go back and forth in our county. So I think the lesson there is that diversification is one of the most important hedges to hegemony, as it were, to someone taking over a whole area or a whole kind of way that people travel. Very short number of years ago, there was a movie called Whatever Happened to the Electric Car?
No, who killed the electric
Who killed the electric car, right. And the notion was that there was a successful move.
I was in that movie.
Yes, I know, and my friend Alan Lowenthal was
Oh, yeah, I was in that
was
movie.
featured. But the notion of it was that there was a significant push by other industries to denigrate the use of it, to say that it wasn't, practical, to say that you couldn't charge it anywhere. And there's still, I think, a lot of that kind of pushback. And I think for us, the answer is this kind of experimentation that creates a network of industry and possibility that is much more difficult to sort of take over just by one or another other industries. That's why I support fuel cell experimentation, whatever it is, self-driving cars, which doesn't take any cars off the road, but in a sense, I guess you can park them 3 miles away and then whistle for them like you could your horse in the old days. So I support this item. I think the extra cost is the result of another problem that we're having virtually everywhere. We're having to dig to do something, whether it's for a subway or other kinds of connections, and that is the paucity of accurate information about what's under our streets. so many of these lines, you know, have been not reported in the right places. So I think this strikes me as a good investment on our part. Don't know what it will lead to. And I think whether we benefit or not financially, I think it's a good question because we don't want any giveaways. But the notion of how you clean up the air, all of these I think are really pieces of it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Okay, we have, I'm sorry, Mr. Robinson?
I'll be quick because I know we've been on this item for a while, but I couldn't agree more. I think diversification is incredibly important. I think fuel neutrality is incredibly important. And I think that this particular item, although if you look at it in just this item, it might be very challenging from a bottom line perspective. I think what it does is it pushes all sectors to try to do better. So it's going to push the quick charging industry to be better, because knowing that this could be a potential alternative, if you can quick charge your truck in 10 or 15 minutes,
Right.
there's that challenge that's made. If fuel cells, the cost can come down on hydrogen to a point where it's cost competitive and you can fuel up in 5 or 10 minutes, great, that's going to work. So I think what this does is it pushes all other sectors, and this could end up succeeding. It might not, but it could be successful in a different way. So that's how I look at it. But I couldn't agree more with the diversification and fuel neutrality.
Do we have a motion on this item? Yeah, a second. Okay, then would the clerk open the roll? Another 9-0 passes. Item 7. Back in from the cold, and welcome Supervisor Nelson.
I used to have 2 refusals on this. I don't know if anyone actually pulled it.
7.
I don't think this was pulled. I think there was just 2 recusals, so I'll move the item.
I'll second.
Any opposition? Hearing none, it's approved. Item 9.
Just reiterated my abstention on that one.
Yeah, I abstained on that one too.
I pulled 9, Mr. Chair.
You did it again, Timmy. Might as well stay in there.
No, I support this item. It's just, my concern was,
Why is Kurt standing behind you? Purposely.
Standing behind me.
Oh, but
I have to recuse. I was watching from the back, kind of thinking you had voted, because I waited for the cue to call the vote, so I thought I'd missed the vote, but apparently I screwed that up. So I need to recuse myself from the agenda item.
From 9?
Yes.
No,
From 7, excuse me.
item number 7, yeah. Due to campaign contribution.
Supervisor
Sukkot
Nelson
Construction.
is recused from 7. Okay. Mr. Hatcher?
Mr. Chair, thanks. Just on number 9, I support this 100%. I just know this is the item, the targeted video right to breathe, and working with Google, which is great. I know we're doing the film, upgrading the film. I was concerned when that would be done because this starts the contract in a couple days, or today, November. I was hoping to maybe just delay it, so when we got the updated film, I wasn't sure.
This is really not money. This is a credit.
Okay,
When we do the upgrade, we're going to do a whole new program.
contract.
okay. I knew it was a credit, but I wasn't sure if we could delay it till the
And
film
let
was
me tell you
finished.
how this credit came about.
Go ahead.
I was driving down the street, and a friend of mine who is a artist manager in Las Vegas called me and said, "Man, I saw you on my computer last night." I said, "Really?" So I knew that was totally out of line with the guidance that we had given Google, because the promotion was only supposed to run in the South Coast Air Quality Management District. So I called the office, and they got a hold of Google, and Google gave us, it was supposed to start out like $30,000. It ended up being a $250,000 credit to run that promotion that was run before incorrectly over again. So that's really the history behind this item.
I'll move, Mr. Chair.
Okay, we got a second?
I'll second.
Would you open the roll?
Supervisor
Eight to-
Nelson.
Eight, 9? A 9-0 pass. Okay. That was item 9, right?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, so that concludes the consent calendar. Then we will go from, that was items 1 through 21. Then we'll take 23 through 28.
I'll move the item.
Second.
Any opposition? Hearing none, those items are approved. Item number 28,
29.
29, I'm sorry. We have a presentation on 29.
Yes, a very quick one. Thank you very much, Dr. Berg.
That's an oxymoron.
I promise you this time. Lucky Tisopoulos, Deputy Executive Officer with Engineering and Permitting. It was a year and a month ago where I was standing before you and presented our action plan to reduce the permit backlog. So I'm going to be giving you an overview of where we are today. We focused our attention, our energy in implementing all aspects of that action plan, which called for a 50% reduction of our pending application count over a 2-year horizon. And I'm happy to share with you that we managed in this past year, 5 quarters, as a matter of fact, to improve our production rates and exceed our goals and objectives that we had set ourselves for ourselves for the first year. So through optimizing our productivity, we
Can
managed
we just
to
take a moment, Mr. Chair? Can we do an opportunity to maybe stand up? Standing ovation, perhaps. And that's significant, right? In fairness, I love fast presentations, but thank you. This was a significant issue. We set a goal. We had a mission to improve service and get these people through the process, and so far so good. That's fantastic.
And
Thank you.
Supervisor Nelson, I've heard no complaints about the quality of the permits being disrupted during the process either.
and this is what we are especially proud
And I
about.
can't tell you how much the chair appreciates your comments. Because I always know your comments are heartfelt.
We get to celebrate wins once in a while. It's nice to do, and you deserve it. I mean, I know everyone works hard. It's nice to set a goal and accomplish it. And the people you're serving are the folks that are here either every week or once in their life, and they just want to get through the process with as few wounds as possible.
Thank you for the kind words. Thank you. So as a result, we managed to reduce the pending application for each and every of the last 5 quarters. We are 41% down. Last quarter, we had broken the 30-year record, and obviously this past quarter, every single month we broke our own record. And what is positive about this, yes, we are working harder, longer, and often on a voluntary basis over time, but we have utilized only 50% of our allotted budget for that purpose. We managed to improve our production rates. If you go back to 2015 and you look at 6-month increments, the applications received in yellow versus the application processed, they're at par, which is not very conducive to reducing the backlog. As soon as we started the backlog reduction efforts, we managed to improve our production, and applications process far exceeded the application received, which greatly contributed to reducing the backlog. In terms of breaking our records again, the numbers of application processed and the permits to construct or PCs issued, we managed to exceed the goals established by 38% and 32% respectively. And it's those improved production rates that allowed us to exceed our quarterly targets for each of the last 5 quarters, and now we are 82% of the way towards reaching that 2-year 50% reduction target. So we are way ahead of schedule. We have not crossed the finish line yet, but we can see the light at the end of the tunnel. What we are very proud about is we spend significant effort and energy in the automation and modernization efforts as well. And I'm proud to share with you that we, with our friends, with the help of our friends from IM, and I need to extend some kudos to Ron Moskowitz, Ora, Saad, and Chris Marley, who has retired. We managed to convert 3 of our forms to electronic forms, and we developed 3 online tools where an applicant can go on the computer at his residence or office and get his permit online without even having to interface with us. We went public with the dry cleaner prototype, and we are working with our friends from the Small Business Alliance and the Korean Dry Cleaners Association, and we are actively seeking volunteers to take us up on that. We are internally testing the gas station and automotive spray booth prototypes, and we hope that we are going to go public by the first quarter of next year. So moving forward, we obviously want to cross the finish line on the backlog reduction effort, and definitely we are going to be coming back to you perhaps in a couple of months with our next phase of online permitting efforts with our friends from IM. And we want to start, once we convert all our forms to electronic forms, we want to start migrating to an electronic filing and processing system and get rid of the paper applications altogether. So we have focused on quantity to reduce numbers down this past year, and we are going to continue that effort for a little while, but we want to start focusing on the quality and improve metrics and improve customer satisfaction. Last but not least, as proud as we are about what we have achieved thus far, we couldn't have done it without staff's hard work, and a segment of our staff is working harder and smarter than others. We initiated a program where we started recognizing our top performers and key contributors, and some of our MVPs are here with us today. Staff, would you stand up and be recognized? Thank you very much for the job well done, and keep up the good work. Thank you. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll conclude, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have or any comments that you would like to share with me.
Any questions?
I do. I join with Supervisor Nelson in congratulating you and your team of staff members in taking on this problem and issue and doing such a fantastic job. One of the things we all know is that the easy ones are going out the door. Right. You're going to get down to that core, really tough ones, some of which have been hanging around for years. And I'd like to know if there's anything the board could do to help you process the really tough ones efficiently and effectively.
You can come in on Saturdays, Joe.
Other than coming in on Saturdays.
Yes. Yes, definitely, there is something that we can do. We are in the process of reviewing some of our policies, modernizing our policies, and get rid of some of the roadblocks. Certainly, your help, can go a long way. There are some limitations on our computer programs that we've developed some from 20, 30 years ago that, with antiquated architecture that is no longer around. Certainly, we'll have to start from scratch and develop new programs to address the new realities. These are not easy fixes, unfortunately, that we can do at the stump of the finger, but it's something, they're multi-year efforts, perhaps multi-million-dollar efforts, but if we want to catch up with the 21st century, we'll have to start investing
we just hired a new IT guy.
We are working great
together. Under his?
We are working great together, and we are going to be bringing some suggestions in a couple of months to move forward.
I should have known the answer would have been, I'm going to need millions of dollars, but.
It's not that bad. We are making the money back. Through this effort, we managed to bring in an additional $4 million that we had not counted for.
Wow, good for you. Great. Bring us whatever you need. Let's get this done. Thanks.
Thank you.
Item number 30.
Mr. Chair, I'm recusing myself from agenda item 30 because of financial interest in Darling Ingredients Incorporated, which is materially affected by this item, so I'm going to be stepping out.
Yeah, right.
Mr. Chairman?
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's it.
Supervisor Ashley?
Yeah, I'm also, I'm disqualifying myself from agenda item 30 because of the possible financial interest in Smithfield Foods. It's a long story, but I do have a
I
conflict
eat a
there.
lot of ham. You think that disqualifies me?
Well, well, my mother,
After
my
your
other
DNA
owns
test, I
some interest
know
in
you're
that, and
dismissed
when
now.
I'm finding out, I'm getting some letters, and the only error is that, hey, you have some shares. It's not very much, but it's enough to, I'd have to disqualify myself.
Okay. Okay, we're down to the core group now.
Okay.
This is the hardcore, these are the hard charges here, okay?
Thank you, Dr. Burke. Good morning, members of the governing board. My name is Tracy Goss. I'm a planning and rules manager. And I have a brief presentation to give you regarding our proposed Rule 415 for the controlling of odors at rendering plants. As you know, we started this rulemaking back in 2014 and went through a number of meetings and different versions of the rule. We were planning on bringing this rule back to the board in 2015, but due to some of the other priorities, such as the air quality management plan, we suspended rulemaking. But before we did that, we actually got quite a bit all the way through the process almost. We already had circulated our environmental assessment document. We had multiple working groups. We also shared with the working groups and worked through a number of issues regarding rule language. But if you'll recall, back in September, Dr. Burke and you, members of the governing board, directed staff to finish what we started and bring the rule back in November. So rendering does provide a beneficial service. It does things that are really necessary. Animal materials that are rendered cannot go to waste dumps, cannot be landfilled except under emergency situations. It does provide beneficial products such as tallow, biofuels, pet food, and it also processes odorous kitchen trap grease. So, but one thing about the odors from rendering plants, as you know, they're very distinctive and they can travel long distances. Currently in our jurisdiction, we have 5 rendering plants. 4 of those are located in Vernon, and 1 is right on the edge of the city of Los Angeles in Vernon. The need for Rule 15 has been around for a while. It was a key priority as a part of the Clean Communities Plan for Boyle Heights. There's currently no odor requirements for rendering facilities. Rendering odors are regulated in other states such as Utah, New York, Mississippi, Texas. And what we're requiring as a part of Rule 14 is very much like what's already required and being implemented in these other jurisdictions. Baker Commodities as well as Darling Ingredients have multiple facilities within the state and the country. And Darling Ingredients is actually already upgrading their facility to do what we're requesting in the rule. But as you can see from this satellite map, the 5 rendering facilities are actually in close proximity to each other, which is why it's been hard to track the odors to a particular source. As you can see, based on the prevailing wind direction, Boyle Heights is directly downwind from a lot of these plants. But due to the shifting of the wind and diurnal patterns, the odors can get to other environmental justice communities such as Boyle Heights, Huntington Park, Commerce, Vernon, Maywood, and Bell. There's essentially 4 key elements of proposed Rule 415. One is best management practices, such as covering of trucks, limiting holding time for materials that are delivered to a facility, permanent enclosures or total or enclosed systems. This applies to the raw material receiving area, processing equipment, and wastewater. Due to the permitting, the design, the cost, needing to get funding, it is going to take about 2.5 to 3.5 years to get these enclosures installed. But we do have an alternative enclosure option for raw materials that could actually speed up and get that enclosure done more quickly due to having a secondary containment of odors. We do have a requirement for signage, much like what we have for Rule 403 for dust, where the facilities will put a sign on the outside of their building that if odors were to be smelled, they could call our 1-800-CUT-SMOG number. Or there's an option also for the facility to put a contact, and the community members or whoever's driving by that smells the odors can contact the facility directly. In the case that we do have ongoing odor issues with the facilities, ones that don't necessarily get to the extent of a Rule 402 nuisance violation, but ongoing odors over a period of time, we do have a requirement for an odor mitigation plan, and in that plan, it would go into the details of what additional measures the facility might need to undergo in order to eliminate the odor problems. We did, particularly in the last couple of months, meeting with the facilities, we did add flexibilities to the rule, working with the facilities and going back out to those facilities and looking at what their key concerns are. We do have an alternative for best management practice. If the facility has a measure that's not listed in the rule but can meet the same objective, they can propose it. There's an option for a closed system instead of a total enclosure, and that would really apply to the continuous rendering operations. We have lengthened material holding times if the material comes in refrigerated. Allow additional holding time for facilities if another facility breaks down and they need to move their material to another facility, just to allow more time to allow that material to go into the operation. And then alternative ventilation and wastewater treatment standards such as chemical oxygen demand. Really the key issue all along has been that of cost, and that is the key remaining issue that we have before us. Two of the facilities are going to bear the majority of the cost, and that'll range annualized from $394,000 to $513,000. But we believe that with some of the options that we've added to the rule, that we can help minimize those costs, such as allowing for that closed system that I mentioned, only requiring repairing of pavement where the material is actually deposited, and then allowing for the alternative enclosure for raw material where they can just do a secondary containment as opposed to venting to an air pollution control device. Before I get into the recommendations, before you should have a blue errata sheet that is with respect to containing clarifications to responses to comments in the final environmental assessment. Most of these comments overestimate the impacts to air quality, water quality, and wastewater. And there was a claim by one of the facilities that was going to require 221,000 square feet of space or enclosures to be ventilated. Well, based on what we've done with the rule, that is no longer going to be necessary. There is also a clarification that naming a person on the signage is an option for the facility. They do not have to do that. And then these clarifications that you have before you do not represent any new information. So with that, Mr. Chair, staff recommends that and requests that you certify the environmental assessment and then adopt the proposed Rule 415. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much for your testimony. And Supervisor Nelson was complimenting Lackey before. This moment, as far as I'm concerned, has been a long time coming and is evidence of a great deal of effort on both sides. And I appreciate everybody's, what I feel is the erstwhile effort to come to a conclusion of a situation which has been long overdue. We have a number of people to testify on this issue this morning, and we'd like to hear from them all. We're going to start with Martin Schlatter, and one microphone, and James and Droley at the other microphone.
Mr. Chair, we've missed Martin for several years. You remember? Martin used to come with the hand gestures. Now I see him on the Gold Line train almost every morning on his way to work for Councilmember Jose Huizar.
Yes, a longtime employee of the Coalition for Clean Air, nearly 10 years there.
Well, I appreciate the welcome back. It has been a long time, and I'm very excited to be here, in particular on this issue. I did have my hat at my chair in case anybody didn't recognize me without my hat. So, my name is Martin Schlatter, and I'm the policy director for Councilman Jose Huizar in the city of Los Angeles. And board members and Mr. Chair, I'm pleased to be here with this topic in particular in front of us today, and to urge your support and urgency in implementing it. The councilman represents the area of Boyle Heights in the city of Los Angeles, and he was in fact raised there and is still living there and raising his family there. So he's very familiar with the putrid stench of rotting meat that often blankets the area of Boyle Heights and is such a nuisance and discomfort and a sickening element of the community there, which it has been, as you'll hear, I'm sure, from other testimony here, been the case for decades. So we're well overdue the time for action to deal with this odor pollution. And I believe that what's in front of you today is a reasonable and achievable rule that your staff has been very communicative about with the community of Boyle Heights. We appreciate their recent attendance at a community meeting that the Resurrection Church and the councilmen hosted to make sure that the community was informed and able to give you informed feedback on your proposal. And I think the key element I want to recognize here is that this is a continuation of the board's focus on environmental justice issues in the Boyle Heights area. As acknowledged, that this came out of discussions around the Clean Communities Plan. We have in front of you really an illustration of environmental justice. What community, other than a low-income and largely minority community, would have to endure the smell of rotting flesh for decades without any government intervention? That wouldn't be happening in a wealthy community. It's happening in Boyle Heights, and it has been for decades. We're well overdue for action here. We appreciate that you've reignited this after a delay. The councilman's office was engaged in the early stages of this rulemaking, and we believe that you've been thorough and have a ready and achievable action in front of you today that can finally let us begin to get the smell out of Boyle Heights. Thank you so much.
I was contemplating this rule the other evening, and I was talking to my wife, and I said, you know, this rule is taken forever. And I said, there are some people who, you know, believe that we shouldn't be in the smell business, and that's another discussion. I said, but when I was 5 years old, I lived in Zanesville, Ohio, and every day at 3 o'clock, the smell from Davies and Davies Slaughterhouse would pervade the community in which I live. So I said, I wonder if Davies and Davies is still in business. So I whipped out my Google phone, and bingo, Davies and Davies still is in the slaughter business in Zanesville, Ohio. And I guarantee you they don't have a rule like this. So the people who live in the same house that I lived in, 73 years later, are still being affected by this same kind of situation. I'm sorry it took us decades, but we're way ahead of Zanesville. So we're going to continue with the testimony. James, you're at the microphone?
Yep.
And I'd like for the Monsignor to come to the vacant microphone. Monsignor Moretti?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, staff, and guests. My name is Jimmy Andrioli II, and I'm here representing Baker Commodities and the Andrioli family today. I want to start off by saying thank you very much to staff. It's been a long rulemaking process. I appreciate all your guys' hard work and know that you guys have a very difficult job. And just want to thank you. I feel like I know you all very well at this point, so thanks for all the hard work on this rule. This rule is very costly and will have significant financial and operational impacts on Baker, while lacking the requisite science to demonstrate where these odors are coming from. While there are odors in the community, we have no doubt their source is not so clear. This regulation, while delivering a significant impact on our industry, fails to provide any scientific backing of where these odors are originating from. Baker has been and will continue to be committed to the environment and the communities we operate in. We use the best available commercially viable odor control technologies and will continue to do so as responsible corporate citizens at all our locations nationally, not just the ones that have legislation requiring it. However, we also have another commitment, and that is to our employees, several of which are in the audience here today. We will do everything in our power to minimize the impacts on jobs, our employees, and their families at our Vernon facility. We will do our best to meet the requirements of this rule based on its text and verbal remarks made by staff, but the impacts are numerous and there is no guaranteed future for Baker or our employees. Rendering is a green industry that actually cleans the air we breathe, removing the equivalent pollution of 12.2 million cars from the nation's roads each year, while also protecting animal and human health by preventing the spread of disease and contamination of groundwater. It's one of the oldest forms of recycling, and we are often known as the original recyclers. We hope that the district will work with businesses affected by this rule to ease the process given the substantial costs, and continue to support us in our joint mission to protect health and provide cleaner air for all species to breathe. Thank you.
That this board has expressed or implied a commitment by the majority, if not the strong minority, that we understand the impact that this has on the business. And we are dedicated to working with you to soften that impact to the best of our abilities. So thank you for your testimony this morning.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Would Felice Aquinas come to the vacant microphone? Father, I didn't mean to keep you waiting.
I'm here. Could I'm Monsignor John Moretta from the pastor of Resurrection Church, and could I say that the other slide that showed the right to believe, right to breathe, I want you to remember, Mr. Chairman, that these young children, they're 8th graders now, but when they were younger, they were part of that film, and they never got any residuals from it, I might add. But we're here again today. The gentleman from Baker is just beyond belief. Just stand outside of Baker. If he doesn't know where the smells are coming from, you know, it's interesting because they're right across the street from Exide. You've got to come in and go, and you've got either the lead in the air or the smells from Baker. I mean, it's just a cesspool. And of course, the other place is shut down. It should have been shut down years ago. But the comments that Tracy made in his presentation today, there's two things that I want to bring up to the board. Is I don't see any penalties for this. We had a very wonderful session that members of the staff came out to our parish to hear from the people. And one of the things they brought up over and over again was, where are the penalties if they continue doing this thing? And secondly, we talked about the signage, and if I heard him correctly, I thought he said they were debating with the companies that maybe they may not have to put signage outside. When they were at our place the other day, they were telling us the dimensions of the signs they would put there that would say, if you're walking by here, you're driving by here, and you can smell this stuff, cut smog. And so I'm not sure. I don't know if he wants to say something about clarify, but I heard him say they're not going to put signage outside the buildings. That would be a real mistake, a real unfair mistake to the community. And the interesting thing, when I hear these rendering plants say there's really no problem, I remember going to the first one was Darting Industries that I went to visit, and I saw these people walking around. They didn't have masks on, and I could barely breathe. It's just putrid. It's just terrible. You want to vomit. And even some of those people were eating. They were going back to their lunch break. And I couldn't figure out how could these people just walk around with no mask. Then I found out after a few days, when you work there, your sense of smell goes away. It goes away. And smell is necessary for an appetite. So I think this is enough reason for OSHA to come in and say, oh, what about these workers here? Is anybody looking after them? So those are two comments that I make about the postage around it and the matter of the penalties. Because if it's just a nice program and it doesn't have any teeth to it, then it's really not going to help the community. But thank you for the staff. They're doing a great job at proposing this, and we certainly approve of it. Thank you.
Well, thank you for your continued support throughout the years. And we have another member of your church, Joe Gonzalez. If you come to the vacant microphone.
We have a question for...
Mr. Chair, can I just have a question if Kurt, as a Monsignor just
Yes.
finished.
Yeah,
Kurt,
just
if you can just address any type of penalties or legal remedies we would have, as a Monsignor indicated, if there was a violation.
Yes, penalties for violation of a district regulation, including this regulation, if you adopt it, are provided for in the Health and Safety Code. So there's an extensive penalty scheme. There are also other enforcement provisions in the Health and Safety Code, orders for abatement, and injunctions that are possible for violation as well.
Then the question of signage.
I apologize if there was any confusion. There is a requirement for a sign to be posted. What is optional for the facility is if they want to put a name of a person at the facility to be contacted. But at a minimum, they do have to list our information to be called.
Thank you. My name is Felipe Aguirre, and I live and work in the city of Maywood, California. And Maywood, California is an environmental justice community. I remember several years ago, Dr. Liu and your former board member, Mr. Yates, were at a community meeting in the city of Maywood. And they happened to, I think it was regarding Exide, and they happened to bring some of those little signs, 1-800-CUT-SMOG. And the majority of the questions at the meeting were regarding the issue of the rendering plant that you're now looking at, this Rule 415. I remember that maybe a few days after that, we called that number when we started smelling that. It used to be on Thursdays when we used to smell it, the odor from the rendering plants. And I think that we called so many times that an inspector came out and we kept calling and calling and calling. And the guy was already there trying to figure out what was going on. So we really appreciate this rule finally coming up to debate, finally coming up to consideration, because people can't play with this kind of odor. You smell it. It's horrible. If you've ever been by Vernon, you smell Vernon. And basically, it's a good thing that this rule is being contemplated. We strongly support it. But I would also like to see what can we do while these plants are being put under this process to do the enclosure. Can we limit their processing when a day, a time, a certain amount of work that they can do? Because it's going to take from 2 to 4 years to get this thing approved, to get it actually started. So I want to know if staff can recommend anything by limiting the amount that they actually do that. It's really incredible that the state of Mississippi has a rule, but we don't have a rule here. And it's really incredible that Mississippi has that rule and we don't have a rule here in this area in Los Angeles, supposedly a very green area. So we see this on a daily basis. We felt it. We're really glad that you finally engaged on this. For quite a while, it took a long time to do it. Strongly support the rule, and we'd like to see if you can make some kind of measures that while the process is being implemented, to control it, to keep it down, the amount that they put out of voters, and thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you so much. Would Ariel Garcia come to the vacant microphone? Your name for the record, sir.
Good morning, gentlemen. My name is Joe Gonzalez. I was born, raised, live, and still work in Boyle Heights. I've had to endure the stench of this place for over 61 years now. I remember as a child, we lived back then in an older house, didn't have any air conditioning, and with the stench of this stuff, we'd had to close the windows and sleep in our own sweat. Well, I'm kind of glad we never slept in bunk beds, because it would have never stopped raining on the bottom bed, because the stench, you can't keep the windows open even to get some fresh air, because there was no fresh air. That putrid stuff wouldn't even let you sleep, because it would be down in your gut, it'd be in your lungs, it'd be on your throat, and it's still going on. And I'm really, really glad that the SCAQMD is stepping up now and doing something about this. I find very few flaws with Rule 415. There may have been one at the bottom of the bottom of one of these slideshows that you show, and maybe we can work on that. When we started this meeting, we started off with a Pledge of Allegiance, and the last few phrases were, "and justice for all." This is all we're seeking. We're just seeking justice. We know that there is money in rendering plants. We know that the financial feasibility of these plants should indeed be a part of the law and a part of their business. When I was born, there was not 6 rendering plants in Vernon. There were less. So obviously, it's financially feasible for these places to be in business, despite what you're going to hear from business owners who just choose to continue this deliberate maliciousness to thousands and thousands of people. And I say deliberate maliciousness because there are indeed remedies. I ask the board to really put some teeth into this rule until we can make it be a state law that would shut them down if they continue to deliberately be malicious to so many people. I also ask that, so they can be out of business if they don't comply. Callbacks from the cut smog. We just found out, I've got one callback. I've called the the AQMD about three, maybe 4 times, and I've got one callback. I believe that was just a result of the meeting that we had at Resurrection Church. At that church, we also found out that there was not enough bilingual explanation as to how you can use this very valuable tool. And I urge you to look into that too as well. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. On the bilingual thing, Mr. Nastri, that's a very important issue. On the 100 cut small, 800 cut small line, what's a bilingual situation?
I'm going to ask Derek Alatorre to respond to the bilingual, but from a broader perspective, we're trying to make sure that we do have the Spanish translation available. We provide the information in Spanish with regards to callers that call in. We should have the resources to be answering in Spanish, but Mr. Alatorre?
Yes, so Dr. Burke, yes, the 180 cut smog brochure we have is in Spanish also.
But what if somebody calls the line?
We do have folks, staff that do speak Spanish. So when they call in, we have, if they speak Spanish, the person who answers does not speak it, they transfer over to one of our staff members who does.
Okay. Just want to make sure that that's happening, because it's got to be important, especially from surrounding that plant. David Alvarez, David Alvarez, would you come to the vacant microphone? Your name for the record, please.
My name is Ariel Garcia. Good morning. My name is Ariel Garcia, and I represent Resurrection Catholic School and God. I know I've only been on this earth for 13 years, but I have come to know my community, and honestly, it could be better. When I wake up, there are always horrible smells, and they take away the beauty of Boyle Heights. I'm only a child, and I understand that I'm not fully aware of the gravity of the situation, but I can't seem to understand why you would pollute the air just to attain a brand new paycheck. If you would live in our community and have to go through what we go through every day, I think you would understand why this needs to become a rule. I have a question. Would you want your kids or grandchildren to learn, play, work, or even grow up in a polluted area? The answer is no, right? So if you wouldn't want your kids to live in a polluted environment, why should we live in it? We shouldn't have to be dealing with the situation, and I think it's time that you take matters into your own hands. You need to take a stand, and it all starts with this decision, so make the right one. Even though we are young and may not be very involved in political affairs, we deserve to be heard, and we need to take a stand. This rule is our words that can hopefully be turned into an action. This is a very serious matter for the well-being of everyone who has dealt with the situation of pollution in his or her community. Adults and children have had respiratory problems because of the pollution in the air, and health is way more important than making money. So in our defense, please clean up our air. Thank you.
How old are you, Ariel?
13.
15?
13.
13. Gave excellent testimony this morning. Excellent testimony. Thank you for coming. Would Daniel Corvallis come to the vacant microphone? Your name, sir, for the record.
I can start?
Yes.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is David, and I have come here to bring a question that I think is underlooked, in my personal opinion. My question is, what are the working conditions for the workers working at these plants that have bad air quality, to say the least? Do the workers at these plants know what they are signing up for when they take this job, or are they unaware of what they are signing up for? I pose this question for the reason that not many people talk about the workers, but I'm sure people bring them up. Most people choose to use the argument of think of the children. It's great, I'm not saying it's not, but if these companies aren't concerned for their workers, how can we expect them to be concerned for the community around them? Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Terry Cano, come to one vacant microphone, and Priscilla Sanchez, come to the other vacant microphone. Yes, sir.
Good morning. My name is Daniel. I think the air quality is a huge problem. At our school, there are days that it smells horrible, but I'm sure you have heard a lot about children, so let me talk about employees. People who work in the area have to go through the bad air quality every day. Why are they allowed to suffer the smells knowing that they are at risk of lung cancer? Don't you know that this is a disease that leads to death? Plus, this affects their families because a lot of families live in the area. I know this isn't a lot, but I hope that this can affect some of the things that are going on with the air quality. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Would Kayla Wade come to the vacant microphone? Your name, please, for the record.
Terry Cano, also a Boyle Heights resident. I just want to reiterate the fact that on occasions where the smell is so bad, I am a severe asthmatic. I can't breathe. Even if I'm in the house, the odors still seep in. And it's not just the fact that I just can't breathe and my inhaler sometimes doesn't work if it's too bad, because these odors don't last for 5-10 minutes. They're hours and days. And there's only so many times you can take a puff of your inhaler or breathing treatments before it starts affecting my heart because of the lack of oxygen and the stress that my body goes through when these odors are here. That's something that no one really should have to live with. And I'm one of many, many people with sensitive respiratory systems. Also, I just wanted to say I absolutely love that this rule is being brought up. It's decades overdue. But I would also like for there to be an addition for suspension or closure for noncompliance or reoccurring offenders with daily fines, and a majority portion of that fines goes to a healthcare fund to help with health affected individuals. I would also like quarterly public reports on rendering plants, and if the company is forced to close, they cannot file for bankruptcy to hide from damages for either health affected individuals or whatever other environmental damage that they do. And I just want to, in hearing the gentleman speak from Baker Commodities, I have children, biological and adopted, and one time the house smelled horrible. And there was 4 of them who left their dirty shoes and their dirty socks everywhere. And each of them said, well, how do you know it was me? How do you know it was me? Well, it was all of them. Not one of them could prove to me that it was not them. And this isn't something that we need to hide behind, well, scientifically, you can't prove that it wasn't me. Just as a property owner, I know whatever money comes in, I need to maintain my house and make sure that I make improvements. These companies should be forced also. For the decades of profits that you made and you did nothing to help with the odor control, that was irresponsible. They need to be more responsible and constantly be made to seek improvements to their facility to keep from affecting the surrounding communities. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony.
Hello.
Your name for the record, please?
Yeah. So my name is Priscilla Sanchez. I'm with Communities for a Better Environment, and I'm currently a high school student. And as you may know, as part of the high school requirement is to complete 2 years of physical education. And in the surrounding area of Baker Commodities and all the other rendering plants, there's multiple high schools. So these students all have to run miles in this heat, in this horrific conditions. And so just imagine having to run multiple miles with a headache and while being nauseous. So I support this rule. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony.
Okay.
Your name for the record, ma'am?
Hi, my name is Kaylee Wade. I'm a youth organizer with Communities for a Better Environment, and I just want to state that I also support this rule because I don't want the community members that I work with to be dealing with this stench for any longer. Thank you.
Okay, would Marina Escondido come to the microphone? And it looks like Luis Silva. Come to the other vacant microphone. How about Rosa? Escanel? Your name for the record, please.
Good morning. My name is Marta Escobedo, and I belong to the CBE in Huntington Park. And I'm in favor of PR 415 because I think it's enough time to stop smelling all the stench and all the side effects that are coming with it. And we have one life to live, so let's make the best out of it. And we don't have to be like trying to pretend that we're okay because we're not. So let's get together, organize, and let's work with this so we can have a better life. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Sir, may I have your name for the record?
Perdón. Buenos días. Mi nombre es José Luis Silva y vengo de Walnut Park.
Hello, my name is Jose Luis Silva, and I come from Walnut Park.
I'm sorry, his
Walnut
name was?
Park.
Oh, got
Jose
it.
Luis Silva.
Yeah, got it. Okay. Thank you.
Vengo a apoyar la regla 415
I am here in support of Rule 415,
que apoya a las compañías a que tengan una mejor inspección de los olores.
and I support better control of the companies that, so that we won't have to deal with these odors.
Por las mañanas en mi comunidad, en Walnut Park, por lo regular, todos sentimos ahí malos olores y deseo que que se controlen mejor.
In the mornings in my community, all of us feel these bad odors, and I would like them to be controlled better.
Principalmente porque ahí hay muchas escuelas y niños van a esas horas a atender las clases.
Especially because there are many schools, and in the mornings, the children go to their classes.
También ya se han hecho encuestas ahí cuando teníamos problemas con Central Merrill, que había muchos problemas con problemas respiratorios que resultaron personas con asma y otros problemas respiratorios.
And we've already had many surveys that show that there are many respiratory diseases and people that have problems with asthma and other respiratory problems.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Silva.
Gracias, señor Silva.
Would Rosa
Yeah.
Escanel?
Sí. Yes.
You're here?
Sí, mi nombre
Thank
es
you.
Rosa
Hold
Esquivel.
on one second. And Alicia Silva. Is
Alicia Silva también.
Alicia Silva here? Would you come to this microphone over here, Ms. Silva? Thank you.
Can you put? Yeah.
Oh, okay. I got it. Thank you.
Mi nombre es Rosa Esquivel
My name is Rosa Esquivel,
y apoyo la 415
and I support 415
porque no queremos malos olores entre nosotros ahí.
because we do not want bad odors there among us.
Ok, gracias.
Thank you. Okay.
Buenos días,
Good morning.
mi nombre es Alicia Silva y vengo de Walnut Park apoyando la 415.
My name is Elisa Silva, and I come from Baldwin Park, and I am here to
Walnut
support 415.
Walnut Park.
I'm sorry, Walnut Park?
Walnut Park.
Yes.
Ok. Y vengo a apoyar la proposición 415
I am here in
para
support.
que nos hagan el favor de pongan más atención a esto, porque sí es muy mal momento para toda la comunidad y para todos los demás personas. Y hay muchos niños y muchas personas que sufren de muchas cosas por problemas de olores, y estos reciclajes deben de ser más requeridos para el procedimiento de operación e instalaciones cerradas por estar afectando la comunidad.
I would like to support Rule 14, Rule 415. There's more attention that needs to be paid because it's very bad for our community, all of the people, the children, all the people that have to suffer from these odors, and these rendering plants have to be held accountable. There should be closed installations.
Y los invito a la mañana que vayan a dar un recorrido para que vuelan, para que sepan lo que es bueno.
And I want you to come
Thank you.
tomorrow. I invite you to come and take a visit so that you can feel it for yourselves. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Did Ms. Silva come down?
Yeah.
Okay. How about Diva Ortega? And Marilyn Lopez.
Hi, my name is Delia Ortega. I grew up in Huntington Park. I'm an organizer with Communities for a Better Environment in Huntington Park. And I actually went to high school also in Boyle Heights, and my whole family works in the city of Vernon. So I personally feel super affected by just like the horrific smells that come from this company. I actually wrote my college personal statement like 10 years ago around like how awful it was to be in the area. So I think it's definitely time to step it up, to do all this processing in an enclosed space, because really it's really awful. You know, like I just remember like taking the bus from HP to Boyle Heights, and like it was just kind of like habit, right? As soon as we would drive past Vernon, everyone would cover their mouth or cover their noses because we knew that it was really awful. So I think that even though it may not have like health impacts, I think it's really affecting our quality of life, and I'm in support of Rule 415. Thank you.
Would Diana Dominguez come to this vacant microphone? Your name for the record, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Marilyn. I just want to say that I'm part of Communities for a Better Environment, and we do these like toxic tours around the city of Southeast LA, and we're pretty much just like going to toxic sites around the area. And whenever we go to Exide, there's times where we can't even get off the bus to like talk about Exide because Baker's Commodities is right next to it. It's like very bad, and it's just. I'm in support of 415. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Would Martin Perez come to the vacant microphone over here? Yes.
Hi, good morning. My name is Dina Dominguez, and I'm with Communities for a Better Environment. I had family growing up in Huntington Park that we used to visit regularly, and it wasn't until an adult and going to Vernon and learning about, companies like Baker's Commodity that I realized that there was this memory of this smell when we went to visit my family that was a result of, these rendering plants and these businesses. I think it's about quality of life. The representative for one of the companies mentioned that there's no scientific proof that these smells have an effect or anything. But like the amazing student who gave her testimony mentioned, if you wouldn't want your family to grow up, work, live, play, go to school with such a horrible, just like sickening, like we've had folks on some of our tours, like our youth member just mentioned, who have physically gotten sick, being and experiencing these like horrendous smells. So for folks to have lived for decades, generations of families to have grown up with such terrible, quality of life because they're being affected by these smells is a travesty. So we're definitely in support of Rule 415, and it's great to see that, staff has recommended to adopt this rule. Thank you.
Would Yvonne Watson please come to the vacant microphone? Your name, sir, for the record.
Martin Perez. I'm a business representative from Teamsters Local 63 here in Southern California. I've been involved with labor for the last 44 years as a rank and file, working for one of the companies mentioned, Baker Commodities. I have been a business representative for the last 29 to 30 years, representing people in all of Vernon, not just Baker Commodities. I commend the kids coming up forward and having their concerns with what's going on with the air in Boyle Heights. Before the record, I was born in Boyle Heights in 1953. I'm 64 years old. I grew up in a time when the industry was booming in Vernon. We had 32 kill floors. You had 3 manufacturers. You had Peterson Manufacturing, which people in this room probably never heard of. We had Baker Commodities, and we had Darling International across the street. In all my times that I've worked physically and worked as a business representative in Vernon, I have never, ever had any one of my work associates complain about, number one, being sick due to working for one of these rendering plants. I grew up in Boyle Heights. I went to Hollenbach. I participated in the BAC, which stood for Boys Athletic Club after school. Never smelled anything. And this is when these companies were booming. From there, I went to Roosevelt High School. Played ball there, played a little baseball, ran track, played football. And it's ironic because people that really get into the political arena and they know things that are going on within their own geographics or communities that they grew up with would have done something about this if it was really that bad. I don't like to drop names. I grew up with Antonio Villaraigosa. He was the quarterback on my team at Roosevelt High School. Gil Cedillo as well. Those guys were in political positions where they would have stepped forward back then if it was really that bad. And that's when it was booming. Now, all of a sudden, it's the biggest issue in Boyle Heights. And I understand because I worked there, and I'm not going to deny the fact that there is a stench. Yeah, there is a stench. With any employment you take, there's going to be ramifications of what you're dealing with. And like the young lady said, one of them got a substandard. Well, quite frankly, some guys did get sick, but you know what? They either resigned, went to another, or something where they can do it. I couldn't be a doctor because I couldn't operate on you because I'd faint. Does that mean doctors should stop operating? No, it's just that I can't perform surgeries. I wouldn't do it. With all this said, and I'm caught in the middle because I do believe, yeah, there should be something done and there's got to be a happy medium there that would support not only your board, but what the companies involved can say, this is the happy medium, let's work it out, let's get it done, and hopefully live in peace.
Your time is up.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Watson?
Hello, you've seen me many times here before. My name is Yvonne Martinez Watson. I'm representing the Sierra Club Angeles chapter, and I'm proud to say today I'm representing the Environmental Justice Committee. I was at a community meeting on October 16th in Boyle Heights at the Resurrection Church, And when I stepped out of my car, I almost fell over. The smell was so intense, and it was a very familiar smell. For many years, I've been living in the city of Montebello. For many years, I lived on the border of Montebello and East LA. And we were in a second-story apartment, and many days we could smell that same smell. And I remember my husband asking me then, where is that smell coming from? And I remember telling him, well, it's some sort of animal processing plant. And it wasn't until like a few days ago that I realized the reason I knew that is because my dad told me. And my dad told me that information when I was living in Southwest Whittier, in a little town called Los Nietos. And that's because all the way over there, we could smell that smell every now and then if the wind was just right. So that's how wide an area these odors have been affecting. I have severe asthma, and I can tell you right now, you ask any doctor who specializes in asthma and upper respiratory tract infections or diseases, they will tell you odor is a known trigger for asthma. When I got out of my car that day, immediately I seized up. And I went into that meeting, and we started the meeting. A few of us had to step outside because it was so intense. We had to keep the doors open. There's no air conditioning in the room. And we all called the AQMD to make a report. I was only there at that meeting for about an hour. And when I got home, I still felt the effect for hours afterwards. And I can't even imagine what these people have been experiencing all these years. So I really fully support this rule. This is an environmental justice rule. This is a rule that should have been placed a long time ago. These facilities do have these type of controls in other places. So this is not an overburden on the facilities. And this is a public health issue. These people should not have to put up with somebody else's problem. These people don't have the option of moving to another job, moving to another house. It's not their fault that this company has been doing this for decades. So I really support this rule, and I support the communities. They've come out here to tell you what's been going on. And if you can, we would like to see these signage put out in Spanish as well. If you can't do it on the facilities in Spanish, can you please consider putting out a billboard somewhere that's under the AQMD's control so that you can have it translated in Spanish so they'll know what number to call. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. That concludes our testimony on this item. I have no speakers from the board. I have now one speaker from the board. Yes. Dr. Liu?
Thank you. A few years back, we adopted a Clean Communities Plan, and by doing so, we made commitments to several communities that we were going to listen to the concerns that they had and address their problems. And what we have from the staff today is a proposal to do exactly that, and it's in direct response to the concerns that were raised by the communities when we adopted that Clean Communities Plan. Personally, thanks to Father John and Felipe and Delia and others, I've spent quite a bit of time in East Los Angeles and Maywood and Boyle Heights at Resurrection Church, among other places, dealing with the Pemmico Superfund side, XI Technologies, drinking water issues in the city of Maywood, and a proposed power plant in the city of Vernon. I think I began going there in 1998 with Pemmico issues that Felipe brought up and other community members in Maywood. So I've had a lot of experience, and I'll tell you that not every time I go there I experience the wretched smell of rendering plants, but at times I have. And when I have, it has been, as the people testified today, very overwhelming. I am encouraged that many of these facilities are already taking the actions that we are going to require of them, and am hopeful that we can minimize the economic impact on those who have to pay to comply with this regulation. I also understand that these companies operate fleets of their own trucks, maybe medium and heavy duty trucks. I want to make sure that staff provides all the material that they can to provide assistance, perhaps to clean up their fleets and perhaps save them some money when they turn over their trucks. I think that might be able to offset a little bit of that economic impact on those companies. I do think that this does boil down to an issue of equal protection and environmental justice, because when staff tells me that other facilities in other locations have comparable controls, but these facilities in Vernon do not, I think it comes down to the fact that we need to provide equal protection to this community. I will support this rule. Thank you.
Board Member Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When we started working on this rule a number of years ago, it was 2014 or 15, I actually visited all of the rendering plants that are in this area. And I can agree with most of the testimony today that the smells that come out of these plants is quite sickening. And I can certainly imagine that living next to that and breathing that day after day is a true burden and affects the quality of life that one would experience. We also had the problem in that area with Exide at the same time that we were dealing with the odors from our from the rendering plants. So I'm strongly in support of 415. I know from my visits to these plants that a lot of their operations were in the open. Certain water recycling was done in the open. The bringing in of raw materials was done in the open. And I think there are some real improvements that can be made rather quickly without tremendous cost. At the time we dealt with the rule, cost was an issue. We recognize that for some plants, it will be costly to do the enclosures, but I see that our staff has worked pretty closely with the facilities that are at stake here, and has built into the rule some flexibilities that should help mitigate some of those costs. So I'm pleased that we have arrived at this point with this rule finally before us, and that we can pass this regulation or this rule to provide some relief to these communities that suffer from the impacts of such a heavily industrialized area where they live. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Supervisor Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'd like to say, first of all, listen, I'm going to support this, but as a board member here, I do think it's important to have perspective. I grew up in Fullerton, California. Sunny Hills High School was on a hill right above the Hunt Wesson plant. And every summer, particularly, I think they waited until it was Hell Week for football players. And it was 100 degrees outside, and they would boil tomatoes. And it was stifling. But in fairness to them, none other than of the old farmhouses, which there were not many, none of the homes were built prior to Hunt Wesson boiling tomatoes at that site. We all knew, or should have known. And, you know, if you move next to LAX, you're going to hear planes in the middle of the night because it's a 24-hour international airport. There are places in San Clemente, if you move, you're going to hear the Marine Corps setting off explosions. That's just part of life, and it racks your windows. It happens. So I'm always reluctant to get too deep a dive. I'm seeing issues at refineries that have been there longer than any of these people have lived there. Rendering plants that have been around. What we don't have in the testimony is how much better or worse is it than it was 10, 30, 50, 80 years ago? As the gentleman that grew up in Boyle Heights from the Teamsters Union explained, my family's business was in Southgate. The rendering and animal killing operations have drastically reduced. Now, I realize with the population increase in these grease traps, maybe the volume's gone up. I didn't get that data and it kind of what we looked at. I don't know where the industry's at. But you know, one thing is true. If you're sitting here in this room today and you're not 90 years old, this has been part of Boyle Heights forever. And I'm aware of no study that said it causes lung cancer. And the children that are here matter tremendously. But it's also not helpful. It's probably a disservice to have them believing things like smelling these odors causes lung cancer. I'm not familiar with that. I don't believe that's backed up by any study. And I just think it's not helpful to have people walk out of this room thinking that they're fighting lung cancer when that just couldn't be further from the truth. It's not related to what we're talking about. There are odors that come out of these plants. These plants have been here since anyone in this room's been alive, I think. That's life in Boyle Heights. I don't know why. I didn't pick that. But if you move to Boyle Heights or you graduate from college and you choose to make that your home, one thing you know right now is that's what life is like in Boyle Heights. Certainly not a surprise. Had they moved in a year ago, you could bet this probably wouldn't happen. Hunt Wesson long ago closed. But, you know, we need to be careful as a board when we take these existing circumstances. So, well, there's total injustice. Look, people move places. I don't understand why they continue to stay. There are good reasons. But they're people's own reason. You know, my family lived in Southgate for a lot of years. We don't currently, but there was a lot of industrial operations around there. There still is. Firestone Boulevard and the 710. It's a busy place. But we can't fix everything as an air quality agency. This agency is largely set up to deal with actual health effects and air quality mandates. If we're going to spend any more time, I'm just worried about what's next. You know, you had the whole fiasco of the Sriracha plant. We should focus on our core mission. We're going to get this done. It's going to make a difference. It is. But the idea that the next battle is, you know, we've had these oil wells in Los Angeles. So I think I smell something. I went to college at USC. I lived right off of Adams and Figueroa. When this stuff's been going on for, you know, 80 years, and the residents live there for 15 or 20, there is sort of justice in having been in a place and people moved to a nuisance also. I don't know anybody's individual stats, and every individual has some different circumstance. But, you know, those things are real, and rendering is necessary in our society. We can't do without it. I mean, we could potentially ship it to the high desert or something, and we could do that with every industry. But we're a dense place. I don't know how they do it in New York City. Apparently in Cleveland, they've been doing it the same way for the better part of 70-some years. That's life. If you live next to certain industrial plants, you know, live next to a sawmill, you probably smell a lot of wood. Food processing plant, you smell the food. Hunt Wesson, you certainly did. I didn't know it was a health effect. It didn't smell that great. But nobody thought they were going to shut down ConAgra either. Eventually, they moved for their own reasons, but it was part of life. And those days, it was a little sporty in the sensory area. If you were running up and down hills at Sunny Hills High School for the football team, it seemed like extra punishment, but nobody was any worse off for it. But I will support this. I hope our board does not see this as an opportunity to tread down every path where someone smells an odor that likely has been in the air for more than half a century. I don't know that that's what this board ought to be spending its time doing. I don't know that that's really our legal charge here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to thank all the people who came to testify from the community and from any related entities. Especially want to say to the couple of young people who said, "What about the workers?" And the testimony from the gentleman representing the workers. we are all telling stories about our youth, and I guess when I mentioned what the smog level was like in LA, if people who moved here for work or because they needed to seek some new way of life, hoping for work, were told, suck it up. You're moving into a place where you can't breathe. That's really just too bad. But it wasn't just too bad, because the eternal question, really, and the one on which this panel has some deep disagreements here and in other arenas, is really, what is the role of your government, your tax money, in protecting your health? There have been many decisions over this last half of the 20th century and the beginning of this one that we do have some responsibility for the health of our folks. And we are no longer saying to people, suck it up. What we're saying is we have some responsibility to require that the air get cleaned up for your health. And this aspect of it, in terms of odor, it's an interesting one related to how we define air pollution and the extent of our regulatory ability. I think under the law, our regulatory ability easily extends to this. And we are not saying to the residents of Boyle Heights, suck it up. You knew what you were getting into. The workers at, believe me, these aren't applause lines, it's just something I think. The workers at this plant, in many cases, they don't complain. We're reading a lot in the paper about women who didn't complain about getting hit on and sexually harassed, and everybody's going, why didn't they complain? In the old days with domestic violence victims, they would say, why didn't they just leave? One has to understand the lives of people who are looking for work, find a good job, especially a union job, and who just really don't want to complain because there's 50 people standing behind them waiting for the job. In many ways, in LA County, it's the same with housing now. Try to find a place to live that you can afford. And then, in many ways, we balance. What will I put up with in order to be able to have a place to live? This board's responsibility is to say, you don't have to put up with all of this just because it was there when you moved in. We have a responsibility to say, this shall not stand. This must stop. Or, in this case, this must be regulated. So I strongly support the rule and our appropriate reach in this matter. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
No problem. Dr. Parker?
Yes. I need the applause. As I was sitting here, I do support the rule, but I thought it would be interesting to state to this community. I was, as you heard me say just a few moments ago, I was born in Birmingham, Alabama. There were steel mills everywhere. I remember in 1957, Michael brought a brand new car, brought it on a Saturday, and Saturday afternoon, I felt like I was the king of the world. Came in and he threw me the keys to a 1957 red and white Ford Fairlane car and says, here, go take your girlfriend for a ride. And it was a brand new car, and nobody in my entire community had a brand new car, let alone a teenage kid. 3 weeks later, the car looked like it came out of a rust pit because all of the pollution that came out of the steel mills had fallen on it. It didn't have a garage to park it in. I then began to realize that the next year, I was president of my senior class and went on to, had to leave Alabama because I could not go to the University of Alabama at that time. Segregation itself was a law of the land. I had to come to California in order to be able to get an education. And I began to realize at that time, one of the rendering plants that I went by within about 6 months after I was here, that I began to realize that maybe California was very similar to that of Alabama. As I grew older and became involved in real estate, I realized that our city planners had really did us a very disservice. It allowed industrial plants to move in and to be developed right next to where residential housing itself would be. And that went on for many years. Zoning laws of the city of Los Angeles, approximately 85, 75, 80 years old. And now that doesn't happen anymore. And we've become wiser. This particular agency was developed in 1970. It's really new type of technologies that we begin to realize now that things can be better, that we can live with industries, but in order to live with those industries, because of the total increase in population, industry and government is going to have to play a role together in order to make us be able to live together. There's a mandate itself that one says that already existing issues themselves can remain as long as they are basically maintained. But it doesn't necessarily mean that that's health and safety. One of the times in Los Angeles, I remember one of the big buildings caught fire, and because it didn't have a sprinkler, and many people got killed and et cetera. But then we began to realize that now it's time to make sure that those buildings become sprinklered. City of Los Angeles passed a law that says now all of these multi-story buildings have to have fire sprinkler systems in them. And in order to do that, the people who own them says we don't have the money to do them. So the city came in and says we're going to step in and help to subsidize that, but it's going to have to be paid for over the years. The rents itself began to increase in order to basically give an amortization. So I think this rule and what we've tried to do is to make these kind of improvements so that we can live together with industry a little bit palatable. It's going to cost everybody a little bit. Maybe the taxes itself will go up a little more, whatever it may be. But I think it's a kind of thing that we have to recognize and find a balance. And that's what we're doing. It's true that these industries have been there for many, many years, and they basically provide a service. They provide work for people. They provide food for us to be able to eat. And there's a cost that is associated with it. A loaf of bread, when I was a young boy, used to cost a dime. You can't buy one today for less than maybe, I haven't bought food in so many years. My wife doesn't even buy food anymore. She orders it over the phone and it be delivered. So, but I would think it's probably more than $1.50 or $2 in 50 years. Those are the costs itself that we have to basically live with. So I think that I've heard everybody come today and say it's about time, et cetera. I've heard industry say it's going to cost us a lot of money to do that. Well, that's what the cost itself of modernization and urbanization itself is for this kind of community. I understand what Supervisor Nelson is saying, and I agree with Supervisor Kuehl. It is a problem itself that we live in an urban industry, and that in order to be able to have the jobs that we want, good jobs, union-paying jobs, et cetera, it's going to cost a little more in order to do that. But I think it's worth it, and I think it's worth it for when we say there's a health and safety factor that we must take in consideration for everyone that we do this. I'm not preaching to the choir because I know all of you here are believers, but I think it's nice to hear people who are sitting on this board, in this dais, be able to say that we understand both issues, and we're trying to find a middle ground in order to make it more palatable for all of us, one, to vote for it, and for you to accept it. Because there's no use of basically doing something that everybody's going to be up in arms about, and we're going to have to be defending lawsuits and all the other kind of things. Let's find something that we can live together with. Industry is going to be palatable, going to make the changes that are necessary. We're going to give them time in order to do it. It's going to cost a little more money, but in the end, we all will be better off. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Dr. Parker.
Mr. Chair.
Mr.
We
Chair.
have Councilmember Mitchell and then Mayor Caccione.
Spoke. I don't know why that's up there twice, but I agree with what's been said. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I share the comments of the two supervisors and Dr. Parker and Judith. And I, again, want to recognize the company for coming, the workers, our staff for trying to, mediate these things, reconcile all the differences. Martin from the council member's office, extend our thanks for your efforts over the years. Monsignor, you and the schools. And again, for everybody here, it's all of us working together as a team. We're trying to balance keeping businesses here, keeping good jobs, but at the same time, and our primary issue, the primary purpose of this agency, as Clark said when it was founded in the 70s, is to improve air quality, to improve our health. No matter what job you have or what year you've been here, we want to keep the jobs, but primary mission is we get there by improving air quality. So I'm with the chair to help soften the blow if we have to. There's grants we have, grant programs. But I want to take a moment to direct some of my comments to Monsignor and the kids that have come today from the Catholic school, being a former Catholic school student and a former teacher at a Catholic high school in Miami, Florida, and a coach, coaching kids out there to have to deal with these odors as the football players or soccer players like coach right now have to deal with. I want to thank you for coming. You've learned more today than you will learn in school over the next week probably, about the governmental process, about how this works, how we've got to, as a board with different opinions, have to balance things, balance keeping jobs, balance keeping your health so you don't get problems with asthma or cancer, whatever, we're not sure what it is. But I want to thank you because today we respect all faith communities. But I'll direct my attention, because I'm part of the Christian Catholic community, that you've put into practice what I think our founder, Jesus, and one of the most famous biblical stories of the Good Samaritan, where a person is walking by and there's people injured. Remember Luke chapter 10, verse 25? And people walk by, this person is injured. Another person walks by because the priest is too busy. But finally, the Samaritan is a bitter enemy of the Jews, sitting there, stops, puts him on his back and takes him to an inn and pays money. You didn't just keep walking by these problems. You've taken a stand today by coming and doing something about it. Father has been your leader. You followed. But I challenge you today, not only in this instance, but when you go back to your communities today and the weekend, not just these rendering plans. We're going to improve them. We'll work together as a group to make it happen so we don't lose jobs, so your health improves. But how can you improve your community? By getting rid of polluting lawn equipment in your neighborhoods? Gas lawnmowers we don't need. There's electric lawnmowers. The cars you drive, get your parents, your friends to drive electric cars, not polluting gas cars. There's compressed natural gas. There's different alternatives. Better types of equipment. At your fields, at your soccer fields, you can get electric lawnmowers. So I challenge you to, how can you make your community better in different ways, boys and girls? Work with Monsignor and make an effort now when you go back, not just the rendering plants, but your entire community, because you're great models today, and I thank you for coming. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mayor Pro Tem Benoit.
I'm reminded of a time where I got to serve on this board with my father, and that's because 3 or 4 years ago, when Exide was in the throes of our mist, and we were going back and forth, the two of us had the opportunity to tour the plant at the same time. It was in the evening, on a summer evening, and when we showed up, we both got there and recognized that this odor was overwhelming. And of course, we quickly realized that had nothing to do with, obviously, with lead, but with the other plants down the street. And as we both stood there trying to figure out where it was coming from and recognize this issue, we both recognized this issue that we had to work on. Now, my dad had some, leaning the same way as Sean as far as to just take us down a path that leads us to other items that maybe we don't want to go down to. But I think he recognized in this, and I do too, that this is a community in need, and this is a community that deserves. And no, not everything is, I don't think you have to accept everything you move into with either. And there are times that change. And I applaud our staff for working with this industry to show that we can bring change. And not everything has to remain the way it's always been since the 20s. Just like not every car has to be a gas-driven car. So I'm not seeing anyone else in the queue, and with that, I'll move this item.
Second.
Item's been moved and seconded. Is there any comment on this item other than myself? I only wanted to say that Ben had told me that story a number of times before. And I think it's indicative of he and his father to step out of what is a preconceived notion of people and be able to perceive a problem from a perspective that is viewed as beneficial to both the business and the community. So it's going to be my pleasure to support this item. And I'll ask the clerk now to open the roll.
Supervisor Kuehl, can you lock in your vote?
All members voting that want to vote? All members.
You learned that from your daughter?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I listen to her say it all the time.
She does, doesn't she?
She says it all the time. This item passes 9-0. We now move to any public comment. I have no public comment slips, which is highly unusual and I find unlikely, but maybe everybody spoke on the item. Okay, Mr. Nastri.
Dr. Burke, I'd just like to make a brief announcement.
Yes.
We've been made aware that there's a compliance issue with regards to Rule 222. It's the submittal of information in response to a form. We took longer than anticipated in developing the form and getting that form out to the regulated community. The deadline is coming up. I wanted to inform the regulated community that we will be using enforcement discretion for a very limited time so that they have the ability to complete the form and get that to us. That's it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we have no public comment. How about any closed session?
We do have some closed session items, Dr. Burke. It is necessary for the board to recess the closed session pursuant to Government Code Sections 54956.9A and 54956.9D1 to confer with its counsel regarding pending litigation which has been initiated formally into which the SCAQMD is a party. The actions are Communities for a Better Environment versus SCAQMD, Los Angeles Superior Court, case number BS 161399. People of the State of California, ex-rel SCAQMD versus Exide Technologies, Inc., Los Angeles Superior Court, case number BC 533528. In re Exide Technologies, Inc., U.S. Bankruptcy District Court, District of Delaware, case number 13-11482, parens KJC. South Coast Air Quality Management District versus Top Shelf Consulting, LLC, Los Angeles Superior Court, case number BC 676606. A report of the reportable actions taken in closed session will be filed with the clerk of the boards and made available to the public upon request. The meeting is adjourned.
All right, this is a test from the auditorium to executive office conference room. Speaking in the microphone, testing the new speaker in the ceiling. I think I hear myself there. Hey, listen, hey, I'm not gonna say anything stupid because you never know where this is happening. Okay, no. Okay, so confirming this is okay? Okay, sounds good. Thanks, bye.